Welcome to episode 37 of the Time Talks podcast, part of the Channel Zero Network. This month I had the opportunity to speak to Felicia Rose Chavez. Along with being an educator and professor, Chavez is an activist, writer, and author of the book The Anti-Racist Writing Workshop, How to Decolonize the Creative Classroom. In this episode, Felicia Rose Chavez spoke about poetry, dismantling patriarchy, anti-racist writing workshops, mutualism, building power, and grief. Thank you to Awareness for the music, and here's a brief jingle by a fellow Channel Zero Network member.
Silver Threads, Still Walking, Still Waking is co-hosted by me, Carla Bergman.
And me, Eleanor Goldfield. This is where we interview long-term organizers and radicals about their watershed moments, what they've learned along the way, and how they maintain their hope on this path, dreaming and building emergent worlds for a present and future anchored in justice and freedom for all.
Because there are forks in the road, but they all lead us home, to the fight, to the build.
Inside my heart is a burning flame. The heat will rise from buried names. Raise the floodlights. The tides will change, the truth shall flow. The river surge and I will show. Raise the
You wrote about the influence of June Jordan's Poetry for the People, and I wanted to read an excerpt from it because I feel your book does this just so much as well, and your writing. I read most of your short stories and essays that I could find online as well, which were just so powerful.
Oh, thank you.
She writes, "Poetry is a political action undertaken for the sake of information, the faith, the exorcism, and the lyrical invention that telling the truth makes possible. Poetry means taking control of the language of your life. Good poems can interdict a suicide, rescue a love affair, and build revolution in which speaking and listening to somebody becomes the first and last purpose to every social encounter." And building on top of this, I was wondering if you could speak on a transformational moment. I don't know if this goes back to when you went to Albuquerque Academy, or after it, or before, or maybe it's a process, a moment that radicalized you to interrogate the white supremacist capitalist patriarchy further, but to also fight against it, but also building outside of it?
That's a powerful question. I don't believe that it's any one moment. I mean, I think there are shocking moments that we live through that we can point to and remember, but the narrative that I've had the opportunity to reflect on is one of consistent lived experiences that I like to think of as splinters, right? They just kind of splinter under the skin where you're like, something's not right about that. Is it just me? Am I being crazy? Am I being overly sensitive? Am I being too critical? And it happens again and again and again until something's just like so much in your face that you can't deny it anymore, and you have a choice to make. Do I, shake my head, walk away, talk about it later, rant privately with my friends, my parents, my partner, or do I take action against it? And I think it took me many, many years to finally commit to that action. First through proper channels, like in graduate school, I was petitioning for change and working on academic committees, working with faculty to create my own class, and nothing happened as a result of that. I mean, it was a lot of extra labor with no real fruit. So it took me writing down my own experience on the page and being vulnerable and saying, hey, I'm gonna count these splinters. I'm gonna take them out one by one. And that started as early as, elementary school, where you're like, why am I being treated differently as a student of color, And then throughout middle school and high school, as you said, I went to a private, predominantly white school in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And by that senior year, I was furious. The context of college changed everything. When I saw how easily my peers kind of transitioned into higher education as though it were all laid out for them. And it was, it was predestined. And for me, it was real work, something I had to kind of claw for and hang on to. So, I guess the ability to articulate what it is that was wrong presented itself in my teenage years, but it wasn't until later in life, in my 30s, really, where I was able to put it down on the page in a way that felt like I was doing it justice.
You talked about that moment really blossoming when you were in Iceland, going back to when you said when you were in elementary school. I remember you mentioning, I don't know if it was in the book or a talk, when you handed your husband something from the third grade where you were reminiscing.
Yeah, he was like, really? We're going all the way back? And I'm like, yeah, we're going all the way back. But that experience of reading the very earliest rendition of the book was a 10-minute speech where I just spoke to what I experienced at the University of Iowa as an MFA graduate student in creative nonfiction writing, and then a list of practical strategies that I do now, kind of pivoting from the way I was taught and embracing a new way to teach creative writing in the classroom. And I cried during that speech. I stood up and just cried and cried because I was saying it. It was my testimony. I was testifying to the people I went to school with and the people who taught me. They were in the room, and I was really summoning the courage to say what I experienced out loud. I think so many of us don't. We don't have that opportunity to go back and say, listen, this is what happened to me here, and we need to change so that this doesn't happen again to your current students and your future students. It was a powerful, powerful moment that I think emboldened me to move forward to write the book.
Yeah, and I really thought the Iceland story was so powerful because you said in one moment you were so emotional and cried because you felt like you were betraying some of these people. But at the same time, when you did that, you found that you had so many people on your side. When people were passing around the paper and trying to dismantle these systems that you spoke about were so violent.
That was the great surprise of this book, and it happened twice. So once in Iceland, where I'm sobbing because I think, what are they going to say? And then I get this glorious response, as you said, from both the people of color in the room and the white educators in the room who said, we don't want to replicate this sort of harm. So what can we do? Help, can we have a copy of your speech? Send it to us, and I thought, well, I can do more than a speech. I'll write on this. I'll really give it everything I have. But in the process of writing, I can't tell you, it was 2 years of constant paranoia. Really awful, agonizing moments day and night where not only am I dredging up hard to confront moments from my past and trying to make art out of it, trying to make a message out of it, but at the same time, I'm thinking, this person from graduate school is going to call me a liar. This person who taught me is going to say that I got it all wrong. This person, I just was constantly thinking of strategies of defensiveness and dismissiveness and denial that has been the signature moves of white supremacy throughout all of our lives, right? Throughout history. And so I thought, how many people are going to shut this down before it even has a chance to speak to anyone? Luckily, before it was published, as we were in the editing phase, a group at the University of Iowa called Black at Iowa Writers came forward and started calling out faculty members by name. Specifically one faculty member, John DeGata, and spoke out against their unfair treatment in the nonfiction writing program. I wasn't hip to it. A friend kind of nudged me to check out this social media account, and I cried and cried then too. Just out of pure relief that it was real, that this experience was shared, and that someone was bold enough to come out before me and do this work. And in in a sense, hold my hand and walk me through the process so that I could be brave enough to do it next.
Thank you for sharing that story. That's really powerful. And it really shows you that when you have the courage to stand up, that others are going to stand with you, even though they feel so alone in that vulnerable moment.
Absolutely. They didn't know. No one knew that I was working on this manuscript. It wasn't like I kept in touch with the alumni committee. You never know. You never know how your work is going to impact someone, how your story, just sharing it aloud, is going to impact someone to go on and share their own story. And that's the power in storytelling, right? And so that was such a relief for me to feel supported in that way and less isolated.
I think another part of your writing that has such a liberatory and powerful effect is that you call out these systems as they are by using bell hooks, white supremacist capitalist patriarchy. Mm-hmm. It's right out in the open. It's not something that some writers try to hide it by talking about systems and things like this, and something so refreshing about your work. And you explicitly tell your story, which I feel calls out patriarchy as well. Mm-hmm. You mentioned how a colleague had said, "We don't want to mother these students," and I loved how you reformatted the language, and you made it so powerful of talking about how we are multitudes mothered again and again in rhythm with time. And you talk about in the piece Color Lines about the co-op living situation and the racism and patriarchy you had to endure there. From your story, the brown line, which would be a simple walk for a man, is this horrifying event for you. And for a woman, that shows that inside your house you have sanctuary, but you should have outside as well should be your sanctuary. And your stories make these so apparent. And I'm just wondering if these tools to dismantle these systems like patriarchy, is it just in the writing, or what are some strategies you use to help dismantle or show these systems with students or in your own writing?
Well, first of all, thank you. I feel so heard and seen by that quick analysis. That was wonderful for me. Thank you for that quick overview of different works that I've put out in the world. That was really special. I think that it takes this reorienting. We're so accustomed to, especially within our educational journeys, to say the right thing, to be whatever the person in front of us teaching us needs us to be in order to move forward, move on, get the grade, whatever it may be, right? Tune out. My practice at heart is about tuning in. It's about doing the opposite, right? It's not about the authority in the room. It's about becoming our own authority. And the more that we can tune in and quiet everything around us and listen. And the first step is to listen to our fears and to listen to our insecurities, because that's just another iteration of white supremacy in our brains. That's just another form of manipulation and control to say, you can't do this. You're not any good at this. Who do you think you are, right? And sometimes these are the voices within our own families from internalized racism, right? This is who do you, you're fancy. Who do you think you are, right? So these are the voices that haunt us, but they live there and they're not going away. We just got to acknowledge that that's what that is. And then we move forward and we say, okay, if I can move past fear, right? What do I want to try? What do I want to risk? And failure is okay. So if we just accept that failure is okay, what do I want to try? And when we attempt something, whatever classroom it may be, it doesn't have to be a creative writing classroom. My goal with the Anti-Racist Writing Workshop is to couch it in creative writing, but please extend it, right? I'm working with science teachers. I'm working with math teachers. I'm working with history teachers. Extend it beyond. Let's activate our imaginations to see how much we can empower our students across the academic curriculum. And so we embolden our students to try something that they're afraid to try, and And then as they're doing it, we ask them to listen. How's it going? Check in with yourself. What are you proud of? What's really hard for you? What do you want this to be, but it's not yet, right? And we just ask questions, encourage students to ask questions of themselves, to be their own assessors. And then finally, how did it go, right? What do you think about what you produced? What do you want to change if you had an opportunity to change it? Go on and try it, right? Until they're able to tune in and say, I trust my own voice. I trust who I am, my gut, whatever we want to call it, right? To be able to go inward and say, I'm going to tune you out right now and listen to me. And I think that is so powerful for all of our students, but especially our students of color and especially our young women of color who can say, okay, now I can trust me. I'm going to listen to that voice that tells me this is an unsafe situation. I'm going to listen to that voice that says leave now, right? I'm going to listen to that voice that says you cannot talk to me. No, thank you. Don't talk to me that way. And I'm going to trust that voice and I'm going to act on it. So it is, as I said, it's couched in creative writing, but the whole gist of it is how can we truly embrace our own voices and exercise those voices to create change in our culture?
Yeah, I love that answer. And you really talk about boundaries in your book as well, and how when you were turning 30 and you talked about the trust in yourself and the power of no, and how this helped you fight back against educational and academic trauma that you were experiencing.
Yeah, that was the turn for me. Was becoming a mother. And it was a really hard time period in my life. My husband, I was a new mother, and I don't consider myself maternal. And there are some women who are like that. I've since learned, where we like, I changed a diaper for the first time when I changed my son's diaper. So I didn't have, it was on the job learning. And I experienced postpartum depression, probably as a situational and hormonal kind of situation. We had just moved to a new town. My husband took on a new job. He was traveling a lot. I didn't know anybody. And I just remember being in the house a lot. There was this huge wildfire, and so we weren't allowed to go outside for weeks because of the smoke. And so it was just like contained, and this not a good recipe for mental health for a new mother, especially. And it was then that I knew I had to speak up. Like I knew I had to start saying what I wanted, what I needed. And so that was a big turn for me. Again, intricately linked with being a woman.
I was wondering, my next question is, I guess it kind of has two questions. They may relate. I noticed a lot of mutualism in your writing and your pedagogy. You talk about deep listening. It also reminds me of some of the Zapatista teachings of asking, we walk, kind of that we learn as we go and we reflect as we go, but we don't get paralyzed by that fear. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering if there's a relation with mutualism with your inspiration for your writing. I also see this ties in with Audre Lorde on the quote you used. The way we can do is by creating another whole structure that touches every aspect of our existence at the same time as we are resisting it.
I mean, that's the difficulty that presents itself, right? Is that we're on a learning journey together as educators, those of us who are invested in doing the work. And I'm doing facilitations now all over the country with elementary, middle, high school, undergraduate, and graduate teachers who are eager to learn. But the question comes up again and again, is this the right place to do this work? Can we do this work within the institution? How do we flourish when the structure is set up so that we fail? And it's a tough question. It's a question that's keeping me up at night, especially when it comes to our younger students. Like they're held to a particular learning standard, right? A very strict learning standard. And there's no collapsing that system yet. As one brilliant educator just shared with me the other day on a meeting, he said, let's do it anyway. with our kiddos, with our little ones. Let's just do it. Let's lead them through an anti-racist writing workshop curriculum, and then they'll become the next generation to overturn the standardized tests and the learning standards that they've been held prisoner to for so long. And I thought that was really an exciting way to think about it, right? How do we learn along the journey to change the restrictions that we face on a daily basis, right? And it's reminiscent of that last letter that I include in the book, which is addressed to the reader. And it's something like, how do we live racism and mourn racism and fight racism all at the same time? It feels impossible sometimes. It's just, I'm just going to lie in the bed. It can be useless because I'm so overwhelmed by all of this. And then there are other days where you can take on the fight and try to change the system within. So,
and are you referring to the A Letter to Close about when the police officer was blocking your driveway?
Mm-hmm.
This may lead to my next question, and you may have already answered it with, I really liked that answer of planting the seeds in the students and the next generations to fight the threat to blossoming that is in academia or just education systems. And this question is, do you worry about your book being co-opted by liberal institutions? And as an example, after George Floyd was murdered, we saw many businesses and colleges make statements about white supremacy and racial justice. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, there's been so many murders since then of people of color, Black indigenous communities and Black trans communities. And also with the recent killings of Dante Wright and Adam Toledo, my academic institution has been silent as well. Do you worry the term anti-racist writing workshop will be branded but still reproduce the violent and toxic problems that you wrote about?
I mean, likely. Yes, likely. I mean, look at, these schools that I'm working with now, quite a few of them before the book, preemptively took on this anti-racist initiative. Right? Colorado College, whom I work for, has taken on an anti-racist initiative college-wide. They're attempting to do the work, I feel, perhaps more so than some of the colleges that I kind of, step foot in and then exit. When I do these facilitations, they're at the very beginning of this initiative. Whatever they label it, is it true anti-racist work? I wouldn't call it that, right? I think that's the term that's popular at the moment. But hey, that's a lot further than what we were 3 years ago, right? No one was throwing around that term at the college and university level to the extent that they are now. Again, co-opting is the right term. I think that they're putting out fires because students are demanding again and again and again that there's change. So I think it's a gesture to address those concerns. The real work happens daily and college-wide, and that's where we get into trouble, because I think the attitude of many faculty members is, oh, well, we'll just have to wait on so-and-so's retirement in order to stop implementing harm, because we all know so-and-so is, horribly racist. It's like terrible, right? There's this tenured system where we have folks who are irresponsibly educating their students. It's hard for me to enter into the Zoom space and do these facilitations when I can see the dismissiveness at play sometimes with faculty. This isn't to say that it's always this way. Sometimes there are very sincere groups who are asking a lot of questions and are very engaged. Sometimes people turn their bodies away from me. They'll roll their eyes. They'll sigh. They're clearly doing something else, right? They're required to be there to hear me out or tune me out, whatever it is that they're doing. The University of Iowa just brought me in to do a panel and a public reading, which was a surprise for me. And it was one of the worst couple of weeks I've had since the book came out. I was not eating well. I couldn't sleep. It was reliving a trauma that I hadn't anticipated would be so difficult for me, and it truly was. And I think that was also damage control, right? I think it was putting public-facing events out toward the world to say, yes, she writes about her experience, and look, we're listening to her. Will there be change that comes as a result of that? I'm not facilitating workshops with those faculty members, and I'm curious if that does happen, right? I don't know. It's disappointing a lot of the time, and I get a lot of hate mail. And you've talked about the gendered politics of this all. I mean, they're horribly sexist as well as racist. And it's discouraging, it's disappointing to hear echoes of these hate messages out of the mouths of professors who are responsible for generations of students, quick to dismiss and deny that racism even exists. It's scary sometimes.
I think you made a great point out of many awesome points that just having an anti-racist workshop, even if it's not being lived up to, it lays this great foundation for it to be called out and put back into place when it's not being used correctly by, as you said, these students who seeds were planted in.
Absolutely.
That is the optimism of this.
Absolutely. I do a facilitation called Self-Advocacy for Students, and that's my favorite one to do because it's how to hold one another as peers accountable and how to hold our educators accountable. And every time I talk to educators, I say you need to explicitly say it. I teach an anti-racist writing workshop. I teach an anti-racist econ class. I teach an anti-racist history class. How can you be so explicit so as to empower your students to hold you accountable, right? Because if you just come out and say it, now you've got to follow through. And I want all of our young people to be able to exercise their voices in that way where they're reminders, constant reminders to one another and to their teachers that they deserve better.
I also love throughout this book that you call out gatekeeping, even with, not just within academia, but within these writing groups, that these workshops, there's often a lot of gatekeeping that goes on. And I like that you talk about gaslighting and also the importance of language, all these different things that really cause so much violence, and how you call out words like literary and classical, which are another synonyms for gatekeeper. And I just really love that I just wanted to highlight that this is so important, what you bring out. And when I was teaching political science and history, this was something I was trying to change in my department, to stop using words like slave and use enslaved. I had a big fight with my department when I tried to get rid of a Pearson textbook and try to add Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz, the indigenous people's history of the U.S.
Wow, that was a fight.
Yeah, and they told me because I didn't have a PhD, I didn't know about scholarship, that the book was against America and all kinds of things, just horribly racist things. And it really reminded me of your story on Shakespeare, of it not being a play that was highlighted for just one season.
Oh my
and it was
goodness.
such an outrage.
Yeah. I mean, I just earlier today, I'm a board member at the Creative Writing Studies organization I just joined, and they put out a call of proposals for conference panels, and I just read the call and noted language in there like, you must cite other sources, scholarly sources that support this work. This is the same old rhetoric that we offer one another to maintain this domination over who gets the control of the narrative, right? And to me, that's no different from our officers saying, there was a meme that I posted, it's a package of Skittles, it's a gun, a cell phone, it's a gun, a sandwich, it's a gun, and then a taser. Oh no. Right? I got confused. I did, a gun is a taser. Like it's control of the narrative. So it extends across our culture. It's not just within academia, but it is shameful how we use that as a standard to enforce white supremacy without having to use those words.
Definitely. Thank you. That's probably my last question. I want to be mindful of your time. Along with your amazing book, who I've already recommended it to so many people, the Anti-Racist Writing Workshop, I'd like to talk about your other writings as well. I love Femme Fatale. So funny. The great fat boy in the sky.
Yeah.
I know with your other writings, I feel they deal with a lot of grief. Of Anatomy of Life is one. The Mindful Birthing. I love that one. I was wondering if you could talk about the piece Memory Loop, which I found extremely personal and powerful and vulnerable. I was wondering if you could talk about the process for this piece. Was it therapeutic to write? Did it reopen wounds, or did it help to heal wounds, or was it a combination?
Yeah, that's the one. I feel like all the other writing was just practice, right? I mean, it was just fun. Well, not always fun, but more experiments, you know. I wanted to try different things with my writing, but that was the very first piece I ever wrote. I taught writing for many years as a way of supporting myself. And I taught writing because I was such an avid reader. And so I think the two go hand in hand in that I was able to share strategies that appealed to me as a reader and relay that, but not necessarily coming from a place of a writer, speaking to another writer. I thought of myself as a teacher for so many years, and it took needing to relocate to Albuquerque from Chicago to go back home and serve as a caretaker to my parents, my dad specifically. That motivated me to say, well, I'll try graduate school. I'll try a writing program. And let me dedicate some time to writing. So I showed up for a 2-week period. I showed up every day a little bit early to work, and I wrote, maybe 20, 30 minutes per day in my little cubicle. And I would write and cry and write and cry. And what I created, I didn't edit. I just sent out. And that was a very early version of Memory Loop. It took me between 10 and 12 years to return to that piece over and over and over again. I did so many different versions of that piece. I mean, the bones are still the same, but I tried reordering it, retitling it. I just adding a ton of research, taking it out. It never felt right. And once I achieved the current draft, I thought, I just knew it. It's like the body knows. I just knew. It was almost like a sigh of relief, I finally did it. And it was, I think, transitioning from this is what happened to me, right? Which I think is what we all come to the page as an act of release, right? This is what happened to me. I was witness to this. Then, this is, let me try to get inside the head of my mother, who had experienced Great Depression and as kind of a stunning, shocking depression, which felt out of nowhere, when in truth was years long in the making. Once I stepped out of her experience and into my own and really owned my own actions, like I'm complicit in this story. I'm not just there watching it happen. I'm involved, and I need to point the finger at myself as well. It needs to be, it needed to be way more complicated than I was initially prepared to make it, because I had to process it first. So to make something of it took many, many years, and it taught me something. I learned about myself in writing that, and coming to terms with my own guilt as a participant in the story, and in that few years, 10 years of my mom's life. And I'm really grateful that I didn't settle for that first draft. I'm really grateful that I did that work and went back again and again, because I think that I needed to teach myself something in that writing.
Wow, thanks for sharing that process. It's such a powerful piece, and you switch from narrative so smoothly in it. Some writers have to use the 3 stars to show a new scene, a new narrative. Mm-hmm. And your piece just went to so many different avenues. It was just so powerful. So thank you for explaining that process.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Time Talks podcast. Please check out some other shows on the Channel Zero Network. Thanks to Awareness for the Music. Please support his music on Bandcamp, and please pick up Felicia Rose Chavez's book out on Haymarket, The Anti-Racist Writing Workshop. And check out her other writings. I'll link them in the show notes. See you all next time, and free Palestine.